can be linked to. So I will do the theoretical part first, and we will see the design after. So there is a framework I really like, which is the framework of the inclusive design made by Microsoft. And the idea of the framework of the inclusive design is the fact that when you're in front of an impairment, the impairment will have three different states, three different status. The first one is the permanent one. For example, in the vision impairment, it will be the fact that you're blind. When you're blind, it's most of the time definite. For the long term. There is also the temporary situation. And it can be an eye infection. We are in spring, so it can also be hay fever and scratchy eyes all the time. It's also something which is temporary. It will be better after, and it can impair your vision. And there is also something situational, which is, for example, the visual distraction. When you are reading something, the fact that there is a light blinking, for example, can be something distractive who can annoy you when you're reading something. So permanent, temporary, situational. Every time for each kind of impairment, you can always see this kind of thing. And that's why when you're working to fix this one, you will work in fact for everybody and to improve the life of all our users. That's why inclusive design and not just only accessibility. And you have the same, so for readability, you will have this thing for the people with like visual impairment, but also cognitive impairment. And that's the one I love the most, because it's almost impossible to classify all the cognitive impairments. You will never be able to make something fully accessible to all the people with cognitive impairment. Why? Because most of the time, some of the specification you want to use and some of the guidelines will just contradict each other. And also because it's depending of what you want to achieve with people. And on the cognitive impairments, you have three different also kind of status. The first one, which is really interesting for me, which is the dyslexia and hyperlexia. And sometimes these two things, like a lot of time, are linked to autism and ADHD. So hyperactivity, attentional disorder with or without hyperactivity. And there are studies showing that for these two things, like autism and ADHD, almost up to 40% of people can have dyslexia or at one degree reading impairments. So that could be interesting to work on this side. But when you will work on this side, it's like interesting for a lot of different person. One of the person, for example, is the person who just arrived in a new country. So someone which is not completely fluent with a language, because in this case, reading can be difficult. If you're not used to read with a language, finding information is not really easy, and you will need more time to read a text, for example, than if you're just completely fluent with a language. This is also one kind of impairment. And stressful contexts. In an airport, if you're late for your plane, you will have more issue to read correctly where is the information you're looking for and to find the information you're looking for. So this is the kind of context where readability can be really, really important. And there is like different type of reading disabilities. So like language comprehension, which is more like when there is a fluency issue, or also with children, it can be an issue. Phonological deficit, which is like this one really focusing on children, and it's the one you will try to improve with child when you're working with like different health specialists. And the one tied to dyslexia and hyperlexia, which is processing speed and accuracy of the reading. And this one is the one touching the most people. Most people are like with this kind of issues, and this is the most complicated one to fix. So you need to work for this one. And dyslexia is something we heard a lot about children, but yes, there is adult dyslexic people. Like there is adult autistic people, there is also adult dyslexic, and we are a tendency to just forget that. So the most interesting thing for me now, how do we read? Like something so simple, so easy as reading, how do we read in fact? And the answer, which is maybe my favorite answer, is it depends. So it really depends on the context. It depends on what you will do, where you will be. If you're reading once again in an airport with a lot of different announcements, you will not read the same with the same manner than when you are like in your bed with a light just next to you, reading without too much noise, a really good book. So your brain is with more or less distraction in different situations, so the reading experience will be completely different. And reading, it's just not linear at all. In fact, we are reading by something called saccade. So this is a saccade. So it's the fact that we're reading not letter by letter, but part of sentences by part of sentences. And we are just like jumping from one part of the sentence to the other part. And between each saccade, we have something called a fixation. And it looks a bit like this. And the fixation are quite interesting because it's where our eyes will spend the most of the time. So it will just fix on few characters, like maybe a syllable, like a syllabus, or maybe a word, but just few characters. And during a fixation, everything else will be blurry. So you will see something like this. And I'm sorry, there is no blur mode in Keynote, so you have like opacity thing, but you see the point. You will have like everything will be blurry except the few characters you're currently looking at. And this may explain why we are more focusing on the shape of the word when we are reading rather than the different letters. Translation, you can make the best content ever. People will not read your content. They will like see your content, they will analyze your content, but they will not read word per word all the content, except if you're not fully fluent, or if you're not used to a language where you will have to spend way more time. But in this case, you're not reading with the same the same method than where you're reading like the text in your fluent language. And that's why you can read this. You can probably read this easily despite all the misspellings. Why? Because you're looking at the shapes of the word and not the different letters in the word. And that's how you can, even when there is a lot of mistakes in the sentence, still understand what are the people talking about. And this is possible because we use identifying features on all the letters. Like if letters are not all the same, it's mainly for this. And this is what we use to like jump just from one fix to the other one. And this is also why we can play with design. We can play by removing some of the shapes. If I remove like the top part of the shapes, it will be quite hard to read what is written. But if I remove the end part of the letters, it's way easier. Why? Because in our languages, the most part of all the identifying features are on the top of the letter. So that's why you can easily play with this and still see that this is to read more easily. But here it's more difficult because you will struggle to see the difference between an I, an R, an N, and all these kind of letters, because you cannot see really the identifying part which is on the top of the letter. And which brings us to one of the first rules: don't write messages in uppercase. Why? Because you lose all the identify features of each letters. Like in the first one, animation. You can see that there is a clear shape of the word. You can detect the shape. You cannot with the uppercase version of this text. Why? Because everything is the same size, except the A, because it's a really great font. But except the A and the small pick on it, you cannot really detect what is the shape of this word. So you cannot easily read it. That's why you need also more time and more effort with your eyes to read when it's in uppercase than lowercase. And you can see this also with the mistakes and the misspellings that we can have. Like there is two different way to I've put two different kind of way to misspell problem. One which is just by inverting some of the letters, and the other one which is inverting a lot of the letters, and it's clearly less readable, this one as problem, than this one. This one in a really big text like the one, like just the sentence that we see just before, you can detect that this one is problem. And we will try to see why. So this one is the shape of like the first one, problem, and we can see that this one is way closer to the shape of the regular form than this one. And this is why we can still see and we can still read correctly a text if there is some misspell or some spelling issues. And why? Because if you're reading really quick, there is no big difference between the first one and the second one, even if there is the E here in between. In fact, when you're reading really fastly, you just see that there is 2 bars in the middle, like here, and the P at the beginning, and an M at the end. Everything in between, it's an issue. So this one, more readable. And in fact, this is because of the syllabus. If you're making the changes, like you're still keeping the same, the same kind of construction for the word. Like we're still having 2 syllabus. And in fact, when you will read, you will use the syllabus as the way to like go from one saccade to the other. Like you will always go on this. And it's not the case with the last one with 3 syllabus. So everything to explain, I use this to explain, in fact, this. This is the kind of thing you can see in design. This is an eye tracking, the result of an eye tracking when we try to see where people are saccading on text and where people are fixing on the text. And what you can see is the fact that there are always at the beginning of the word, at the end of the word, if they really know what a sentence is talking about, or if they're just like going quickly through a text, or they're going in between sentences when they just want to really see where an information is. Except in some situation, like if a word is really complicated, you will use the syllabus that we've seen before to go with your saccade, and you will spend way much time to see exactly where the information is. So, saccade and fixation, you can see this here. Saccade, it's the stroke over there, and the points are the fixation. And this is the kind of information you can use to understand if your text will be readable or not. So doing an eye tracking, it's expensive and it's not on all projects, but we can use other systems next to this one to get this kind of information. But one of the things you can see for the readability here is the fact that people are not reading the text. Like people start to read at the beginning the first sentence and they are quite involved with the beginning of the text. But like the end of this paragraph must be really interesting. There is New York City as a word, so that must be interesting, but people are not interested at all. And they go directly to the next paragraph. And there is no title, there is just lists, and you can see that people are really not involved with the text. And this is most of the time how we read on internet. We are not reading text. When you are working on a website, when you are doing something, we are just not reading. We are spending a lot of time aside, like just to rest our eyes most of the time, but we are just going from information to information. And this is one of the interesting things. And as you can see here, it works for a word or for a paragraph or for a shape or for a form or for an object. We are mainly looking at the shape and analyzing the shape of what we are reading. And it's what we are doing here. If you see the point and the order of the points, we are not at all reading the first sentence. We are just going from opened to Manhattan, going back to here, which is like the middle of the paragraph, going back to the information, and we are just going from point to point. And in fact, we are doing the same thing with words and shapes. Like if I ask you on this one to find the 2 spots with the same color, it can take some time at the beginning. There's 2 spots with the same color. They are here. But because because it's not directly visible, it's not the 2 first one or on the edge, you need a bit of time just to detect which are the 2 dots with the same color. Mainly because you need to read all the dots one after the other. If I'm doing this, you will see it's way easier. Why? Because it will be on the edge. It's one of the first things our eyes tries to do. Looking at the shape and identifying where the information is. Looking at the shape or just the one next to the first one. But this one is another topic, Gestalt laws and all this kind of design rules. So, readability. The best way to learn readability is going to an airport. In an airport, you will have a lot of writings everywhere explaining a lot of information you don't care about because the only thing you want to know is where I will board, when I will board, and where is the boarding gate. Like it's the three only information you want to have at one point. But you will find a lot of other information. And we are in Amsterdam and we have one of maybe the best sign system in an airport, which is the one in Schiphol. So yeah, kind of useful for readability. And the person who made the signage of Schiphol is also Amsterdam based. I'm sorry, Dutch speakers, but it's Meixenaar, something like this. Meixenaar. And it's an Amsterdam-based designer, and he made 4 rules for the readability, which are quite interesting. The first one will be the continuity. When you want to have something readable, you need continuity. Like, we are not reading just for pleasure on internet most of the time. We are looking for information. That's one of the main goals. So if we are looking for information, we have a goal. And when we want, as a website, as a content system, when you want to provide the information, we need to have some continuity. So continuity is a bit like this. So it's a bit repetitive because it's the same. And I assure you that after this one, there's like 10 other like this one, which are exactly the same. But it's because new people can come. But the information is just repeated until the endpoint. So we need to provide the information as much as possible until the end. So sometimes repetition is also helping the readability of something. The second one is conspicuity, and it's the fact that you need to be eye-catching. Eye-catching in a lot of different ways. It can be eye-catching with like nice signs. It can be just a good typography. It can be being semantic, like using titles and lists and block quotes with like something visually different between all the different types, but it's like being eye-catching and understandable by everybody. So conspicuity. Consistency. Consistency, you can see that in a lot of different ways. But one of the things is using always the same typeface with the same purpose. So all your title will have the same typeface, so you can see that these ones are directly titles. But it's also consistency in the language. If you want something to be readable, when you are talking about in the website about restaurant, you need to call them from the beginning to the end restaurant, and not just change in the middle to call them snack bar. Because if someone is not reading but just looking for keyword in the text, because you're looking for this, you will quickly scan the page and go to the different keywords. So that's why you need consistency. So the readability is also tied to the copy and the consistency. And clarity. In the message needs to be clearly understandable by everybody. So it means that except if you are in a website dedicated to scientific people, you need to be understandable by everybody. People with cognitive disease who can sometimes don't have a lot of vocabulary, or people with like who are not fluent in the language, and the same, the vocabulary can be limited, but always try to be clear in your language, understandable by everybody. But also try to, in the clarity, try to directly identify where to find the information. So for example here, like the icon help us to find what kind of information you will have. So it's the same here for the clarity. If the message is complicated, also try to find other ways, visual ways, to explain what are you offering as a content at one point. This is also helping the readability. So the 4C of readability. And thanks, Paul. Meixenaar? So readability and web content. First thing, if you want to be readable, there is more and more websites offering a way for dyslexic people like me to activate an open dyslexia font on the website. And this is maybe one of the worst options ever, because it's like, oh, we are aware of the fact there's an issue. And yeah, just take this. And this is not an answer, because first of all, Open Dyslexia, it's a really great font. But all the studies shows that dyslexic adults don't have a lot of advantages to use Open Dyslexia as a solution. It's working a lot with child in the learning of language, the learning of reading, but it's not working efficiently for scanning web pages and finding informations. So Open Dyslexia is not a solution for web projects. It's a great tool, but not in this case. But there is a lot of other things you can do. So I did not try to push font and typographic rules, but more like copy, content, and what you can also push when you are, for example, HTML and CSS developer in a mockup if the designer did not work correctly on this one. So always include the most important points, all the most important points in the first two paragraphs. It's what we've seen in the eye tracking before. People were looking mainly at the first one, then scanning the page, browsing the page, but not looking at the content. So if you want to push a content, first two paragraphs directly at the beginning. And if you have a lot of content that you need to push, in this case, use a heading hierarchy. It's really important to have like something that you can just scan and understand with the title, where is the information I'm looking for. No more than 3 different sub-levels, because at one point it's completely unreadable and you are in front of a Wikipedia articles and not a website, but try to use more heading hierarchy in a page. Even on a home page, you can have a really good heading hierarchy, so try to use it more and more. And because sometimes dyslexic people are also using screen readers, because when you are looking for some information, it can be really useful to just browse the content from title to title without spending too much time on your text. Heading hierarchy is also really useful for this kind of tool. And start the headings with the word carrying the most information. So trying to always find a way to push the copy in a way where the information is directly in the first words. Why? Because people are mainly looking at this one, and after they can just go somewhere else on your layout. And if you have a lot of different but related small content, try to find a strong visual system with icons or with a border, with a specific background which is different from the rest of the website, to just show that there is like something in common with all these small items. Bold. Bold, bold, bold. Use bold. Bold is great. Strong, not B, but strong is really great. Use it a lot on your sentences. It's really important because you will help the different person to directly go from the point you choose on the page as relevant from the other point you choose as relevant on the page. So you can help and guide people to go from one point to the other. And yeah, this one is like something we can say every time, but click here is not a link. And when we are reading, it's the same. Click here, it's not an information. So always put specific information into links. It's really important because links most of the time are visible, directly visible. They are underlines, they are in colors, they are sometimes bold. So it's eye-catchy. Because it's eye-catchy, you need to put information into this one. Be semantic. HTML, NLHTML5. Be semantic. It's really important. All the time, be visual and semantic. A div, it's the last solution in HTML, CSS. And try to do this. And it's also important when you are doing like for the readability, because if you are quoting someone and it's not clearly visible because there's like a design specific for this, or just like the good markup and like an indentation and this kind of stuff, it's not clear that you're quoting someone. And one more time, having this kind of different element, it's adding some nice eye-catchy element to a page, and you are helping your user to stay on your page. So for the readability, you need a diversity of different elements on the page, and for the diversity, you need semantic. And even if you have diversity, having a consistent layout to just motivate your user to stay on the page, because we are just looking for specific information. You see on the eye tracking, most of the time, we are just like looking the first element. If we are not finding the information, we are going to see something else. So just use a consistent layout to see that, to show to people that there is other element after this one. And a good visual hierarchy. Like if you have 3 different paragraphs, we have studies showing that the first paragraph will be quite red, the second one too, and from the third one, it will be almost non-read by people. So if you have a lot of content, this kind of layout is not always working, but there is something called like, yeah, people are just not seeing the last one, called like the layered cake, yeah, something like this. And the idea is, in this case, people can see the titles. If it's not interesting, go to the next one, see that there's another title, so see all the titles in the page, and select which one was relevant for the information they were looking for, and going back to the next one and reading the information into this. Because at the end, what we want to achieve is people finding the information. So with title, we can directly go to the good points. So also helping readability. Layer cake pattern. Layer cake pattern. That's the word I was looking for. So there is a lot of different patterns in readability that we've seen. Like there is a lot of studies showing like the eye tracking on Google, for example, and all this kind of stuff. Layer cake pattern, it's clearly the one on Google, by the way. So it's the fact that there is a lot of just layers on the page. Between all these patterns, that there is no good one for readability. The good one is just the one adapted to your content. So the logical one to use in your context. So it's something you have to see. If there is a lot of small information, maybe adding like visual element like icons, this kind of stuff, using list, using quotation, but finding your pattern. There is no good pattern for the readability. And propose a distract-free experience. So, for example, not this. This is just the good example of something which is not distraction-free as a layout. So if we remove the fact that it's not accessible because the contrast is not good, you can barely read some of the elements, and I will not show you the HTML of this one, but you cannot just focus on this one. And if you have someone with reading disabilities, or if you have someone with attentional disorder, or all these kind of cognitive impairments, this is a hell. You cannot just focus on what people are trying to achieve on this website, which is looking for a car to buy, not taxis. So yeah, trying to avoid this kind of experience. You're not designer? No? I don't know. I love taxis and I love New York. So yeah, it's look quite nice. But not really useful. But even good website like Airbnb can also sometimes do this. Like Airbnb, you're looking for an apartment to rent for your holidays. That's great. And this person is, yeah, so you're doing your search. And Majid is he looks quite friendly, but he was talking to me. Like I was going on the page, I had a purpose, I was trying to read information, I was trying to just understand what I wanted to do, and this person was talking to me. And they look quite nice, but I'm like, no. So this is the kind of thing we can also impair, like can also be disruptive for the readability. Because when you're trying to read, here it's just a form, it's okay. But if you have like content, if you are a brand trying to show what you can do with like a lot of content on your portfolio, and just next to this, someone speaking to you and explaining you the life, you're like, yeah, great. But I cannot listen to you and read the content at the same time. I need to make a choice, especially if you are dyslexic. At one point, your brain is on one thing or the other one, but you're not just doing the two things. So nice people, but no thank you. And the other thing is let your user the time they need to read. This is the real time. I did not accelerate the video. It can be kind of okay, but you never know what are the capabilities of the people you have on your computer in front of you. So sometimes you can have people who are not fluent in the language. And when I learned English as a French person, and it was really painful as a French person, I needed a lot of time to read that. And it's not the website. We need to decide how much time do I need to read this information. I need to have the time I need. I need to have the time I need to read that. And if I'm okay, going to the next one, but just not removing me the text when I'm reading. And the last, but not the least, advice on readability. maybe the most complicated one in a company, is the scissors. Cut the content. Remove everything unneeded. You want to improve readability? Remove everything except the information you want to provide. And just keep this one. You don't need something else. If you want a good experience, just provide the information people are looking for. We don't care about the history. Except if you have a really good product with a really strong stories, most of the time a phone is a phone. So remove all the unneeded content and provide what people are looking for. Which not mean removing everything, but just really think about removing a lot. Most of the time you can remove half of the content you put on a website, even more. So just think about that. What do you want your user to achieve and to get as information on your website? So now on your different projects, how to experiment on this, because eye tracking is a gadget, but it's not really accessible. First thing is playing with your content. Like most of the time our content will look like that. The first thing is trying to put some headings, real headings, like the headings are here but not really visible. So put some visible headings. And it's an advice I'm giving to you, but it's never too big. Okay, at one point it will be too big, but just go bigger. On the web today, we can go bigger. We don't have a space constraint. So just go bigger with the size. It's a trend in design, luckily, at the moment, but just go bigger. And we will all have this issue because we will be getting old, and because we were getting old, we will have a bad view, and we will have more difficulty to read, and we will be really glad that website stop using 14 pixel and 12 pixel as a font size. So just go bigger. Go bigger and with like more line height, but also you can always put more white space, more margin, more white space every time. If someone is asking you, is there enough space on this mockup? No, never. More white space. Always more white space. It's the best advice you can do on this one. If a designer is asking you if everything is okay on the mockup, never say yes. More white space. Always. And you can use heatmaps, like the one you can get in Usabila, in Hotjar. It's not the most accurate system, but if you're using, for example, the moves, we know now that when someone is using a computer with a mouse, we have a natural tendency to use the mouse as a guide when we're reading. So a lot of time, if we are really focusing on one part of a paragraph, the mouse will slowly move to this paragraph. So we can also use this to understand which part of a text are really read by people or not. Sorry. So here you can see that, for example, customers, it's something interesting for our customers, but also the date and where to find the information. It's something where we have like a focus of people. And when we try to like change a bit the text, oh yeah, and the button here. And oh yeah, it's interesting by the way. The F shape that we were talking about before, it's typically this. The fact that people are reading this, then going here, reading this, then going here, reading this one, and every time there's less and less people going from, and less interest going from the first one to the next one. That's why the F shape, because the second bar is always smaller than the first one. And when we change the content, like the F shape, oh no, my slide was quite good in fact. Yeah, the F shape, kind of. And when we changed the content, we had a slightly different result, and we see that people were still interested by some information, but this time it was like when it will be available, and mainly find a reseller. So this is not the click, but just where the mouse was going. And just with this, you can find what kind of information people are looking for when they are reading. And if you want to improve the readability, design is a thing, but putting more information about finding a reseller partner, it's in this case maybe more important, because you can have a shitty design but offering directly the good information. So readability is not always just about having a good design, but just patching this information in this case, like before in the user experience or like higher on the page or this kind of stuff. But you can use this, and not only the click. Most of the time we're looking the heat maps for the clicks on the heat map to know where people are clicking, and moves. Really interesting. And because I've shown some really bad example before, I have some good examples too. Okay, the first one is a good but with one disclaimer. I'm sorry for the contrast of colors, but it's not mine. It's Avocad who made this in 2016, I think, and that was a really nice website. And you will see that you can have something readable with catchy illustration and animations. I'm still sorry for the green. So catchy animations, and you have like something readable, not too much text, just the information, small animation. I was scrolling. It's not an automatic thing. The animation are when you are scrolling. So you have a lot of good things to do for the readability. Links directly, even except the learn more, but links really visible. The fact that there is like lists, a real system for the hierarchy of titles, good illustration to also show the information and support the content. This is also improving the readability. So this is the kind of thing you can do. It's design, it's nice, and it's readable. That's nice. Smashing Magazine, the last redesign. A lot of people won't like it, but I really love it. And this is really readable. There is a lot of content. There is a lot of content. A lot. A lot. A lot. A lot of content. But it's readable. When you are going through the layout, you can clearly see like the layered cake pattern. And it's just readable because you can clearly see what is an article, what is not an article, and finding the title and go finding your information. And you have the tags at the end, big font size. So voila, you can use this kind of thing. And I just use voila in French. That's amazing. Like a French website doing something similar, like Vanity Fair, a magazine, really readable. I hate Macron, but it was on the homepage. And the same, like you can clearly see directly the titles, but also the category, which is with a different color system, and everything is clearly identified. Even if you are going quickly through this, someone just looking at the page will go as quickly as this, and you can find information. So this is also a good example of how you can do something readable and almost accessible. So yeah. I love this magazine, Off-Screen Magazine. So a physical magazine for people in the web. And it's the same. They've used a lot of different good practice for the readability. The first one, it's big. Like the font size is big and it's really readable. But also there is like, except this, there is every time something, but there is like good hierarchy of information between the titles, and there is like background systems, background colors used as information visual systems to show what is going together or not. And it's working quite well. Even if the layout is not always the same through the page, it's working quite well. So, and this is readable. And every time, I don't know if you see, but it's always, most of the time, for the main information, black on white. Because it's always more contrasted. Even if the ratio of contrast is the same, it's always more readable when the information is, for a lot of text, in black on white. And if you want just to showcase some letters or some words, like really small title, you can do this in the other way. But because of the reflection of light, it's less effort for your eyes to read something black on white than to read something white on black, because your eyes will be just used to the fact that there is less luminosity going to the eyes because black is not reflecting the light, and the white element will be so bright that it will just be more painful for your eyes to read white on black. And that's why in this case you are using gray. And black on white once again, but working really well. It's this layout, for example, this page, like e-commerce based, and it's a really long e-commerce page. But same, you have like an information system. You have really big titles, not too many information per different block, just a big title with 2 words, 3 words, and yeah? And a lot of caps lock, but for title. For title. It's only for title. Yes. Right. No, not the paragraph. There's not a lot of paragraph, but yes, for titles. And just for titles, even if there is a lot of titles. But it's working quite well. If you go through the page, like, see, this one is not in caps lock, but yes. But still, it's working quite well. Because you need less shape of word if there's only 2 words when you're reading, rather than a complete sentence with it. Because in this case, you can't. It's big. You can see detachable fanny pack, even if it's going quite well. But yes, caps lock. I cannot go to the next one until it's finished. I'm sorry. I tried. And the last one, an example I really like. I found it this morning on Awards. But it's really nice, and I need to go to the website to show him because it's really nice. Showing that we can do readability and animations with not too much content if you want things to be readable. Why is it so small? Oh, yeah. And even with the animation, you will have an information system. So titles are titles. You can clearly see them. The animations are not too big. They are not always present. There is like small break, so you can still focus on the content. It's kind of nice. Okay, it's really nice. And you have a consistent layout, but still you have something really creative. So just to show that we can do something fully readable and creative. And yeah, I'm sorry. It was in case I don't have internet, but I have. So yeah, thank you. Merci beaucoup. Et si vous avez des questions, so if you have some questions.
Hello. That's scary. Well, well, I'm glad most of you are still here. It's a little bit emptier, but that's probably because we're a little bit behind schedule or something like that. But that will also mean that you have more chance to win the raffle, so that's good for the people that stayed here. Yes. Um, so before I continue with the raffle, I just want to mention a few things. There are stickers and T-shirts on the table over there. If you're interested in them, there's some very interesting from new software things like Flash and GeoCities and things like that are amazing stickers. And the T-shirts, they're medium and large. They're from the Mozilla Developer Roadshow, which we hosted once. And we still have too much T-shirts left, so just grab them. If you want 6 T-shirts, I'm also fine with that. I don't know. Maybe you have a house to paint and just want to have some extra T-shirts. Okay. And the other thing I wanted to mention. Oh, right. Today we also announced our next meetup, the one in August. This one will be in Rotterdam at Mirabeau, which is very close to the train station, so it will also be a pretty short commute, at least if the trains are going. It will be an evening all about web Bluetooth. We will have 2, maybe 3 speakers, and we will have one of the speakers is Niels Lane here. For the ones that have been to NLHTML5 before, you probably met him because he's done like 5 different talks here. And the other one is from Fichela Meer, and she's going to talk about how she used web Bluetooth and other APIs to improve her vibrator. So that's also going to be a very interesting topic. So that's it. I will now start the raffle. We not only have a ticket to RefreshConf and a ticket to Beyond Tolerant, we also have 2 Amazon gift cards to raffle off. They are sponsored by Werkspot, so let's start with that. Okay, there's a couple of rules. You cannot win twice, and I'm not allowed to win, so that's the rules. Okay, so as you maybe can see here, there's 118 RSVPs. There's not 118 people here, so this is maybe gonna take a little while. So let's do it a little bit fast. Koen, is Koen here? Koen is not here. Too bad. Oh, we're raffling off the gift cards first. So, Aaron, yay! I'll give you the gift cards in a minute. Or maybe I could just give it now. Come up. Here, hold this.
I hold this, Paul. Well, you get the card. Get them both, yes. Smart. Congratulations. Here you go. Yay.
Right, next one is Peter. Is Peter here? Hey! So next up is the Beyond Tolerant ticket. Who wants to win the Beyond Tolerant Berlin ticket? Okay, if you don't want to win it, just give it to someone else. And Vincent. He just went away, too bad. Hey, that's me. Huh. Oh, sorry, Larry, you're also not allowed. Sorry. Marco. Is Marco here? Already gone. It's gonna. Fabiana. Congratulations. I don't have. Sorry, I don't have anything to give you. You can send me a message on Meetup, and I'll give you a code that you can fill in. And then for the refresh conf ticket, which Joel will give out, I guess. Yes, yes, of course. You're here, so. No. Mark, is Mark here? Nobody pretending to be Mark. Okay, that's good. Peter Yannick. Congratulations. Well, it will not be Joel giving it, but it will be Thijs giving it right now. Congratulations. The one thing, you have to bring the ticket, otherwise you cannot come in. That's right? Yes. Okay, so that's it for me. So next up is Shep. And, well, he's setting up, which probably won't take long.
Maybe not.
I will introduce Shep if I can find my phone. Oh, Thijs, can you pass my phone? Or thanks. Ooh, otherwise, I don't know who he is. So that's okay. Here it is. So if you ever go to conferences here in the Netherlands or in Germany or wherever, you're bound to have bumped into Shep. Luckily, he's also one of the nicest people you can bump into, so that's good. Shep is a freelance front-end developer in Düsseldorf, where he also has his own meetup called Webworker. Is that correct? Webworker? It's today. So why are you not there?
I'm not a master of my schedule.
Okay. So and yeah, that's too bad. So, and if your German is a little bit better than mine, make sure you listen to his podcast called Working Draft. And today he's here to give you an overview of the native browser APIs that freed us from MooTools and Prototype, or jQuery. Give it up for Shep.
Yeah, hello. So no introduction needed anymore. We'll head right into my talk. As Paul already said, we're going to talk, or we'll have a look at native browser APIs, and we'll have a look at how they can help us get free from the grips of different types of libraries. There will be parts where there will be maybe a bit more code, but at the very end you find a link to the slides, so you don't need to memorize everything or to write down or to take photos. And if you have questions in between, because there are many topics I'm gonna touch, then I'd say just ask questions. We will start with a celebration, and the celebration is that jQuery is 12 years old, so in computer life that's maybe like 100 years. And that's like a good reason to look at jQuery and to maybe think about why it was created. So back in the days in 2006, there was W3C, so there was Firefox, maybe even Firebird, I don't know. And then there was IE, and both use different APIs. So jQuery was there to normalize and to map between the different APIs. And that so where it helped most, I would say, is in event handling, attaching events to elements. Then it also fixed certain browser bugs. Some browser bugs were really hard to fix, and jQuery did it for us transparently, so we didn't feel like jQuery did something for us. Then one amazing thing was Sizzle, that is basically the DOM selection and traversal engine that was part of jQuery. It had a pretty nice API with method chaining, so this, I think they came maybe first with that concept, and other copied that later. They also had nice APIs for animations and eye candy. So that's basically why jQuery was invented and why we adapted it and loved it. So thank you, jQuery, because you protected us from the bad world outside. Coming back to today, the question is which advantages are left from jQuery nowadays? So the old IEs are dead, so there's no discrepancy between the APIs of the W3C and IE, so nothing gained here. Also, the need for browser fixes has diminished a lot. There's still a few fixes needed for the mobile browsers, but not to the extent that jQuery fixed bugs back when it was born. We still have the nice DOM selection and traversal engine. I think it's still a joy to work with it. And the same holds true for method chaining, and also what I missed to say is the method signatures, they could be changed, so you could take the same method and pass different parameters as to your liking. So that was nice as well. Some say that's not a good pattern. I liked it. And it still offers a nice and convenient API for animations. What built up since 12 years ago is a huge ecosystem of jQuery plugins. There were a few more before they deleted their Subversion repository by mistake, but still there's a lot left that is nice to work with. So, is there any drawbacks in using jQuery and jQuery plugins? If we look at the size of jQuery over time, we can see how jQuery grew step by step, and this growth was could be seen in the uncompressed version, in the minified version, and also the minified and gzip version. So the costs were there. There's this tweet from Paul Irish asking the question, who cares about 30K of JavaScript if we still don't optimize images and shove like 1 megabyte of images down the throat of the users? The one thing he didn't take into account, and he was corrected by Yoav Weiss, was the fact that images don't block the page rendering, whereas JavaScript blocks the page and blocks the main thread. So 30K of JavaScript are worse than maybe 300K of images. And since back in the times, we got new devices who were 10 times slower than our desktop devices. And if we look at mainstream mobile devices and how long they take to parse 1 megabyte of JavaScript, then we can see that it's over a second. So it's just it's over a second just reading your JavaScript and preparing it, and then nothing has happened yet. So it was not executed, and it doesn't affect download times. So that's just understanding it, and it blocks the browser for a second. And on lower-end devices, it can be more. So the Motorola G4 is like a lower mainstream device. So coming back to the file sizes of jQuery, this maps into almost 400 milliseconds parse time on a standard Motorola, and the minified and gzip stuff is half the time. So it's still close to 200 milliseconds, and that doesn't sound much, but that's just parse time, and it's just the parse time of JavaScript and not parse time of jQuery, and not parse time of jQuery plugins that are put on top and stuff like that. So, and then there was a post of Alex Russell, and he coined basically, or he said, if you want a fast website, try to keep your budget of the budget of your assets between 130 to 100 70 kilobytes, depending on how much JavaScript you use. So if you use a lot of JavaScript, then you should stick to the lower end. If you use more, then you can like put in a bit more. And I think we are far away from that today. Yeah, and it's also he's talking about all the resources. And then there's another point, another aspect, and that is that code that is implemented natively in the browser is always faster than just-in-time compiled interpreted code. So the more we can shift our stuff from JavaScript to the native code, the better. And in that regard, a lot happened. Basically, it's this term of paving the cow path. So jQuery and others showed what people wanted to use, and the browser vendors and W3C then followed suit and tried to build standards around that concept. So the most important thing is that the old IEs that we all hated died, and that new browsers came, and also that Microsoft adopted an evergreen like concept. The bad Android browser came and died also, so this is also history now. And yeah, we got new standards everywhere that help us work with websites without using JavaScript libraries anymore. So it's time to stand on our own feet and to leave jQuery our protector. Let's see how we can translate things that we use jQuery for into native code. Yes. Oh, sorry, yeah. Switching my laptop. All right. Yeah, sorry. So the first part is DOM selection and traversal. As I said, jQuery offered Sizzle, a really nice selection engine, but browser makers or standard makers catched up with Query Selector and Query Selector All that accepted CSS selectors, and yeah, that made our life nicer. One problem we have with the results of these DOM query methods is that we get back a node list, and a node list is only like sort of a subset of an array regarding its capabilities. And in order to iterate over these collections, we need to resort to a for loop, and we cannot use for each or stuff like that, which we got with ES5. So we need to fix that, and it's easy to fix. The different ways to fix that, basically we just turn a node list into a real array. And to do that, so most of my code will be ES6 and upwards code. So what we see here is one of the two ES6 versions of converting a node list into an array, and that's just by putting that into these brackets and the spread operator, and what comes out is an array, and we can then use for each and map and filter and stuff like that. So this problem is solved. Here are the other ways of doing that. So this is the traditional way of converting a node list into an array, and then we have this one that I showed, and then you can also do array from, which is the newest one. So let's have a look at how jQuery or what the jQuery methods were that we could use, and how that looks into vanilla JavaScript traversing the DOM. So I don't know, I think most of these are methods you use. I use often closest and stuff like that to walk the DOM, but you can get that in the native document object model as well. So we're covered there. Then DOM manipulation. Yeah, I don't know why the W3C decided to vary the names a bit, because, for example, append is append child, whereas prepend is not prepend child, but prepend. But yeah, that's just a quirk. Some of these need polyfills. They're pretty small, so not a big problem. Yeah, then working with CSS classes, that's something I enjoyed a lot with jQuery. And nowadays you can use class list for that. So you add a class, you remove a class, you toggle a class, which is the toggle class method of jQuery. And you can also have or add multiple values if you want. So you could do an add with comma separated values. You just need to know that IE10 doesn't allow or doesn't know that, because it's a like a next level version of class list. So if you just put one class into your method, then you're fine. Then setting CSS styles in one go. In jQuery, you just did element.css, and then you had a map, and you could set multiple styles at once. We can do that as well by using like an ES6, I think, construction that is object assign. That's basically the same as jQuery's $.extend method. So you take an object and you just merge another object on top of it, and element.style is an object or a map, and you just merge new properties on top of it. So there you have it. Then event delegation. I don't know, are you using event delegation? I hope so, because it's really nice and it's also saving resources. But doing event delegation with native code is a bit more complex. What we can use there is first, so events bubble up the DOM constantly, so we can just attach an event handler at the very top, and then we'll get all the events. We need to hook that up with a something that can like check if something matches a certain CSS selector, so that we are there where we were with jQuery, and that is done with matches, the matches method of that you find in HTML elements. And so you would attach an event listener, and then you would, every time that events listener would like be notified of an event, you would check the target, and if that matches a certain selector, then you would execute the callback. So pretty easy. One question, and that is also not solved in jQuery. There are certain events that do not that are not like bubbling up the DOM, so you cannot do event delegation. One of these is, for example, the blur event. You cannot get the blur event through event delegation. But there's also a solution for that, and that is maybe you wondered why there's this Boolean parameter every time at the at event listener method. Maybe you just leave it away. Maybe you set it. But that parameter decides if so at which point during the event phase you are like listening to the event, because events are bubbling up the DOM, but before they bubble up the DOM, they start at the root and go down the DOM. So, and depending on what event it is, for example, blur just vanishes and stays down at the element and doesn't bubble back up. And the true parameter switches your event listener from the bubbling phase to this capture phase. And at that point, you can listen to any event, even if it's then catched down the DOM. And that way you can also do event delegation for blur events. Yeah, then we have the Web Animations API, which is, I think, modeled pretty close to first to how CSS animations work, but then also to how jQuery's animate method works. It's basically the child of CSS animations and jQuery animation. That API doesn't gain that much traction, so you find it in Chrome and Firefox, but not yet in Edge, for example. Even though there was Rachel Andrews working for Microsoft, and she was a big proponent for web animations. I don't know why that didn't work out, but there's a polyfill, and then you can use that, and later when the browser support it, then the polyfill can just be removed. Fetch is the new Ajax, a lot simpler, so not much code to show. That's it. So I think that's so nice to work with that you don't need the XHR implementation anymore. And then there's other libraries, for example, like Lodash or Underscore, which you could maybe also get rid of, depending on what you do. Because we do have a lot of language advancements in JavaScript for arrays, array methods, new array methods. So we had these here in ES5, and then sort also, and then we get new ones every year. I don't know, do we get new ones this year, Paul? Nope. Yeah, the latest discussion around new methods was this, flatten, smoosh, whatever gate. And yeah, thanks MoTools. We hate you. And here are a few code examples how you can use these methods and how they can be helpful for you. So I don't know, those are maybe a bit more exotic. The other ones we heard of, but these are like, really, do they exist? Yes, they do. And maybe you can just substitute stuff you used Lodash for with these. And the same holds true for objects. So we do have these methods already implemented or planned. And object.assign, I showed you just with merging CSS properties. So it's basically jQuery.extend. But with keys, you can get the keys of an object and then as an array, and then you can do whatever you like that you are used to do with arrays. So you could not do a for in or for off loop, but you could do a for each on object keys, for example. That's for the language features. And then next thing that doesn't autoplay is a solution for a use case we probably often come across, and that's building sliders. And there's a property, there's a CSS property invented by Microsoft for IE10 that is scroll snapping, and there's an old syntax and a new syntax, so just beware of that. But if you use it, you can build such a slider that snaps into place pretty easily, and just with 2 lines of CSS code on top, or maybe 3. So it works the way that you define a scroll snap destination on the containing wrapper, and another one, a coordinate on the child element, and then the browser tries to snap those points together. And it even works with different sized items. So you can have like a slider of all different width slides, and they will all snap. What doesn't work here is like you cannot do an infinite slider, not without using JavaScript. And once you want to programmatically influence the slider, then you also need to use JavaScript. But I'll show you something more after that that you can use also to reduce the amount of JavaScript you write, like animation loops or something. One question now is, what do you think? There's one browser that doesn't support it, and which browser would that be? No, it's Chrome. So they re-engineered their whole animation system, and that was basically a blocker for implementing this. And so in the bug, in the Chromium bug, I see that there's activity, and I'm really hoping that they find an end pretty soon. And then there's another thing that is supported in Chrome that they basically activated once they removed this blocker. I don't know what this blocker exactly was, but that is smooth scrolling. So you can just say for a certain part of the page that you want a scroll behavior of smooth, and then it will. Then you can just have jump links, for example, and they will not. It will not jump right away to that place, but smoothly. Yeah, works in Firefox and in Chrome, and yeah, not yet in the other browsers, but that's something you can decently do with progressive enhancement, maybe. Then there's different libraries that we use to check if a certain font is loaded or to load asynchronously fonts. But you can also now use the CSS font loading API and, for example, load fonts and then set a class once they are ready that will make the browser use these fonts. So you don't have a render blocking font, and once it's loaded, you can apply it. And then there's also the use case of lazy loading stuff, mostly images, but you can lazy load everything basically. And I'm pretty sure everybody here used the jQuery lazy load plugin, and if you use it, then you need to set this data source attribute and to put something that doesn't make sense or that is just a 1x1 pixel image into the source, so that we don't have the resource scanner of the browser already find this image and downloading it, but to have the control over when it's downloaded. The problem with these lazy loading approaches is that they are basically a truckload of very bad practices. So what they always do is induce layout thrashing. And that means that they need to measure the page and the scroll distance constantly. And by doing that, they invoke reflow and relayout of the document because the browser needs to do that to then be able to determine all the different metrics. And that's pretty expensive. And they hook themselves up to scroll events and or they use set interval. So it's just pretty shitty. And we can see that. So that's on the left, that's the source code of this jQuery lazy load plugin. So to their defense, there is no other way of doing it. So nobody could have done it better. But still, on the right side, you find a page from Paul Irish, and he lists all the methods and the stuff that, if you use it, leads to layout thrashing. And the arrows show which of these things are being triggered. So there's a lot of layout thrashing apocalypse going on there. But again, there's a solution for that, and that's intersection observers. So there's a new group of APIs in the browsers that is the observers, which is not to be confused with observables, which is also pretty cool hot shit, but that's something different. And observers, they have a characteristic of being asynchronous and of you don't ask the observer, you just say, okay, observer, do observe something, and once the conditions are met, you ping me. So it's basically a a push system, and it's asynchronous. So that's something we'd like to have, because we don't want to interrupt the browser when doing stuff. We want the browser to ping us once he's done doing things the browser does. And so this is like a rough cut down version of how you use an intersection observer. So first you need to create an intersection observer, and you do have a callback. The callback is executed every time a certain condition is met. The conditions are then defined here in the options. So there's a root property. You don't need to set it. If you don't set it, it will default to the viewport. So the viewport is then the intersection area, and if stuff goes into the viewport, then it will check the intersection amount. Then you have a root margin. You don't need to set that as well, but you can. If you do set it to positive values, it will extend the sort of the hit area of that intersection container. So in this example, I extended this to the bottom by 500 pixels, and that, in the context of lazy loading images, would lead to images being below the fold, but not more below, not more far away than 500 pixels. They would be loaded as well. So it would enlarge the window. And then there's the threshold. The threshold is the value that is relevant for the intersection observer to fire. So if an object surpasses this threshold, meaning in this case, if 10% or more of the object is visible, then the callback would be executed. And the other way around, that's also pretty important, because otherwise you will have stuff that you cannot explain to yourself happening. Also, if you go below the threshold, it will also fire. And then once you've set up the intersection observer, you can hook it up to as many elements as you like. So in this case, I observe 2 elements, and every time one of these elements comes into the viewport or leaves the viewport, the callback is executed. And this is then a bit with the callback. So you have, for example, here in the callback different entries. That is because it's asynchronous, so it can be that it decides to just to batch and queue stuff and to wait for the execution. So it might be that there's more objects coming in at once. And then you can check, for example, if an element is intersecting or not with the container. And that is important because it will fire right away, because once you set it up, every element that you observe will either be below or above the threshold. So it will always fire once, and you only want the image to get loaded if the element is intersecting with the viewport. And that's why you put in the check. And then you can also unobserve the element. For example, if you decide for the image is loaded, you don't need to observe it anymore. What can you do after loading the image? You can do nothing. So you just take it out of the observation. And that is done via observer unobserve. So this would be the lazy loading, the jQuery lazy loading, but inefficient. And funnily, when I looked at the current master branch of that plugin, I've seen that they are also implementing intersection observers now. So then you can use that again if you like. Okay, and then what did I just use? Oh, I used DOM content loaded, event listener. That's like using document ready, jQuery's version, but that's super old decade, super last decade. We don't want that. We want to be cool and do new stuff. And that's why we use another observer, and that's the mutation observer. And the mutation observer is meant to observe the whole DOM or parts of the DOM or even just attributes, and is also heavily used in the context of web components. And what we can do with that is, again, we set it up, and so this is the mutation observer, and then we tell it to, for example, in this case, to hook itself to the root of the document, and then to check the whole child list like recursively. So whatever we add to the DOM will trigger a notification. And this works even in IE 11, so that's pretty amazing. And what we can do with that is we can hook up an observer, and then when it fires, we can check the added DOM nodes against, for example, a CSS selector. And so one could imagine using the mutation observer to set up sort of a switch statement for different CSS selectors, and then to initialize certain elements in different ways. For example, we could, for every image, we could initialize an intersection observer afterwards. Or if we have a classic slider that is not CSS powered, we could augment that with JavaScript to something interactive. Advantages is you can initialize elements even before DOM content loaded, as they come into the DOM tree. Elements that you inject later will also just get their usual treatment, so you don't need to pay attention to like, okay, I insert something and then I need to initialize it by hand. And yeah, that's basically what I just said, so nobody can forget to initialize an element. That's maybe also interesting for if you AJAX stuff into the page, but there's also caveats. And one of these is, sadly, that if you set content via NLHTML, that the mutation observer will just take note of the most outer element and not of all the DOM nodes that are part of the NLHTML like subtree. That was a bit of a downer for me, but you can solve that by basically by querying what is inside newly added nodes. So so that's what you can see here. I have a filter on the added nodes also because I get also text nodes, so not just DOM elements but also text nodes, and we are not interested in text nodes, we don't want DOM elements. And then what I do here is basically I build an array together that is made up of the added nodes and also their child nodes. And then I have it. And I use getElements by tag name because that's an older method that browsers support for a long time, and it's also less capable than jQuery's than query selector all, and therefore faster. And then there's one more edge case. For example, so I've said that these observers are triggered asynchronously and that they batch stuff. So if you inject stuff and then you inject stuff again into that same place, you might end up with the mutation observer just firing at the same moment. And then if you query all the child elements, you would get the same result elements because you would query twice the same place in the DOM, and you don't want elements to be initialized twice. You just want it once. So you need to know which elements already pass through your hands. To do that, you can use, for example, a weak map or a weak set. It should be weak set in that case, but there's also weak map. And you can just add every node that you already like turned around and had a look at to the weak set by using add, and then you can query the weak set with the has method to see if you already have added that node. And that way you can filter out nodes that you already know. Yeah, and then there's another caveat. So if you have a huge page, I found that on a page with over 12,000 DOM nodes, that Mutation Observer gets really slow. So if you have a big website, then Mutation Observers are not what you want. So how I solved it, I degraded Mutation Observer just to be basically sort of a trigger, an event where I would set a variable to true, DOM change true, and then I had a loop that was running on a 250 milliseconds interval and was just checking if DOM changed was set to true, and if that was the case, it would poll the whole DOM again with get elements by tag name because that's fast, and would check for new DOM nodes. So that's then the more simplified version, and so I got processing time from 3 seconds on that big page down to under 1, so like 650 milliseconds. This is what I had to show. I hope it was inspiring and you'd like to look into certain things and to play around with it. Some are bleeding edge stuff, some are already not so bleeding edge, and yeah, I'm open for questions. So I'm just repeating for like the recording. So you were asking for, is there how would you do a scenario where you had used a fade in or fade out method in jQuery nowadays with these technologies, or is there any new framework that helps with doing that but uses these new technologies, right? Yeah. Yeah. So I think jQuery itself is moving into that direction. jQuery 3.0, I think, uses a lot of the new stuff, and it's 2.0 and up, and 1.9 is still there, and there you have all the stuff for the old IEs still in there. In your specific case of fading in and out, I would just resort to setting CSS classes and then using CSS for almost everything. Also, slide up and down can easily be done by setting max height and then an overflow hidden. So you can animate max height, and that works pretty well also. Yeah. But if you're still after like bulletproof, no-brainer stuff, which I can totally understand, I think I'm not really saying that we should never use jQuery again. It's just we can use other things if we like. Then I would also use jQuery because it's still, as I said at the beginning, it still has a nice API. Yeah. So a very good question. The question is how I feel about polyfilling stuff for old browsers and therefore increasing the load for them. Uh, so it depends on how many people use these browsers, of course. So you need to look into your analytics data. But I see it not just as a as helping old browser people or old browser using people, but also as a sort of a performance degradation for everyone that it does not use the old browsers. So the question is of which do you have more, and would you like to make modern browser users more happy, or do you have a large user base with old browsers? Because if you look at mobile devices, you have pretty much always have bleeding edge browsers nowadays, Chrome and Safari, and they have the least power available. So I think your goal should be to make your site the fastest for these devices, like generally speaking, and then to put more of a load for desktop users, which use like i11 or 10 or stuff like that. More questions? Otherwise, I'll stick around, and now I'll have a beer or so, as opposed to before my talk. Thank you for listening.
So, well, thank you all for being here and for staying this long. Okay. So, before we leave, I just want to thank all the sponsors again. I want to thank Werkspot for hosting us tonight. I want to thank Google developers, Mozilla, and CSS Day, and also Frontiers for sponsoring us. And I want to thank RefreshConf and Beyond Tellerrand for the tickets. And like, I also said CSS Day. Yeah, you were just not paying attention. And I want to thank all of you for being here. I also want to thank the speakers. I want to ask them to come up real quick. Leon, Damien, and Shep. And I want to ask Thijs to hold the microphone. Thank you, Thijs.
Alsjeblieft.